Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Erudition Network. Welcome to the Erudition Network Black History and Interactive Knowledge Session. This is Black History Month. This is a very busy month for the Erudition Network, specifically on my side of it, because I do a lot of different things and I get involved in talking a lot of different podcasts, and I called upon to answer questions. It's just a very, very busy month, but I enjoy this month. Not saying that it doesn't happen throughout the year, but Black History Month definitely pushes us as African descendants to really start asking questions about our history. And I try my best to answer as many questions as I can, because I know that I'm going to give you the facts without any sophistry, without any derision, without any lies. So I try during this time of the year to make myself as available as I can. We were a little bit late getting on here tonight. I had some things, as you may or may not know, I am currently working on a book. I've putting off for a couple of years now, actually writing anything, any books and things. I had published books several years ago, but I stopped because I had other things that came up in my life that made me start changing my attention to other things. But I'm trying to get back into doing that, and I don't do anything haphazardly. So my push has been to do something a little bit more technical. Good to see you, Dad. I'm happy that you're here. I'm happy that you're here this evening with us. There are a lot of things that we could say. I'm going to give, before I start all of this, I'm going to give people a couple of moments, a minute or two, for folks to come in and possibly join us live. But I'm excited about this Black History Month. I'm excited because I'm starting to see in many different communities, people are starting to gravitate towards wanting to know more about the history of Black people, not just Black people. And so I am excited that we can share this history, we can grow this history, we can do better as a people learning this history. So much of what has been lost in our community comes from our non-knowledge, right, of who and what we are and where we come from. And it has affected many parts of our lives, right? It's affected our sociology, our psychology, the way our children feel, the way they think, the way we think, the way we feel, and not knowing who you are, where you come from, is a gap. I've been doing this podcast now. I realize coming up here now, almost about 4 years. I can't believe it has been 4 years. And there are times where as a social historian, as a public historian, there are times where it is extremely frustrating, and you want people to gravitate to this knowledge and to learn and to grow, and sometimes you feel like they don't prioritize it. But then you have to understand, as a historian, as a person who is dedicated to this type of teaching and knowledge, everybody is not going to be. And I think my mom, because she made a comment to me when I first started, everybody doesn't gravitate towards it, towards our history. And though it is important, though it is something that I greatly believe um, changes mindsets when you know where you come from, everybody does not, it doesn't spark their interest. So we will get on sometimes. And when we first started this, um, I was like, oh my God, we have nobody really watching. We got one or two people watching, or um, and it became so frustrating. But then I noticed something. I noticed that despite the fact of who we saw live, um, we were also getting people who were sharing the program, or we were getting people who were going back and watching the program later. And once that started happening, I started to realize, stop looking at the numbers. Stop thinking about who's watching when and how they're watching. I love our interactive sessions where we have 10 to 15 people in here, and we can talk about history and we can kind of go into different levels. I love that. But it doesn't happen all the time. A lot of people have different things that go on in their life. I have things that go on in my life. So, what am I saying? I'm saying that when you log in to look at this program or programs like this, you may not see a lot of people in the actual live. Don't be fooled by the importance of what it is that we're talking about. Don't get lost in the amount of people who you see following or you think you see following, because the knowledge that we're providing here is deep knowledge, and things that you were not taught in school. You were not taught in school. And so we spend a great deal of our time on these interactives talking about things that everybody doesn't know. And that's the benefit, because I want to spark thought in you. So as we get into this Black History Month, right? As we talk about um, Black history, I want to know, do you all know why we have a Black History Month? Right? Do you know why, or how it came about? Who was the reason that it came about? Why? What was the who, what, when, where, and why of how it happened? Because it's something that we're supposed to get taught in school. People tell me that um, it's taught in school, but I don't often see it or hear people really talk about it. Anybody? Sean Anthony, I saw you on there. You're pretty smart. You're pretty smart. Why do we have Black History Month? It's the importance of it. I'll give you about a couple of more seconds. I was trying to send out a notification, but a couple more seconds. I know that it's meant to be a month, and we honor the sacrifice that led us to freedom. We now have, however, I don't know anything else about it. So here's the thing: Black History Month holds a very significant um, place in American history, and there's a reason why we recognize, we celebrate, um, we educate, and we try to let everyone know about it. Um, Black History Month serves as a way, like you said, Sean Anthony, for us to talk about our experiences, our accomplishments, to give different perspectives on what Blacks did in our history and in our community. We do that because a lot of time the recognition isn't rightfully given, and a lot of people, excuse me, um, don't know why it started. Right? It is important to celebrate your cultural heritage. And one of the creators, the creator of Black History Month, um, Carter G. Woodson, is the one who started it. You know, it's funny. I tell people we often don't refer to Carter G. Woodson or W.B. Du Bois as doctors, even though these men had doctorates. You know, they graduated out of Harvard with doctorates. We do not say that, and it always weirded me out. We say their name, but we don't give them their accolades, right? Especially accolades that were well deserved at a time when most Blacks weren't getting them. Um, but it is important to understand um, why Carter G. Woodson felt it was important to have Black History Month. You know, he was a man who spent pretty much his entire life, um, being motivated and being engaged in African American history. I say African and American in that way because he understood the importance of it, right? He understood that these things should be taught to our kids. And at a time when it was almost outlawed to do that. Sorry about that. But Dr. Woodson spent a lot of time trying to get those things out there for us. So he understood that why we needed it. And he dedicated his time, his life, his efforts to growing it. He was the founder of Black History Month because he started something called the Negro History Week in 1926. And he established that week, right, to promote the study and celebration of Black history because he saw that much as an academic, much of our history was lost to us. Much of our history wasn't taught to us on purpose. But he saw it as something that would build our self-esteem, that would raise our communities because then we would know who we were. He did not think that it was fair that we were on an unequal footing where most immigrants who came from different countries knew exactly who they were. The children of the slave had been stripped of that. And so Negro History Week was something that was supposed to be able to push us to learn more about who we are. Now, I greatly appreciate Carter G. Woodson because what I learned from Dr. Woodson was that history is not always received. History is not always welcomed. People do not prioritize it. And it's funny because history is something that is a part of us. History is something that is a part of us mentally, psychologically, and even physiologically. We are all the products of what came before us. And many of us have been taught to dislike our history, especially in the African American or the communities of color, because of the evils that have been done to us, because of the things that have been said to us. We tend to put history as a low priority. We don't understand our purpose and human prehistory. What do we mean by prehistory? Well, when we talk about prehistory, we're talking about the things before people said they were writing it down. We don't understand our Paleolithic, Neolithic ancestors. And a lot of us, if I were to come ask you that, right? Who was your Paleolithic or your Neolithic ancestor? You might look at me and say, what are you talking about? This is how the people have categorized history for the better part of 1,000 years, right? We know that 40,000 BCE, right? Presumably, there is evidence as we look at the artifacts and archaeological artifacts and bones of man, right? So we know that man was a creature or a person that lived nomadically. In other words, they roamed, right? And we call it the Paleolithic era. But many of us don't see ourselves in that, because when I pick up history books, they don't look like us. Sometimes in the history books, they will make them a little brown skin. Sometimes they don't show them at all. They just talk about man. They give them a monkey face, a half human face, and that's what they called them. But the truth is, as we look through history, as history is found and discovered or rediscovered, as we look through genetics, we're starting to find that man is a lot more man than he was hominin. In my new book that I'm working on now, I spent a lot of time not talking about homonyms, right? I don't believe that we should spend time talking about creatures or things that are not human. And I believe a lot of times that in our history, when we talk about that Paleolithic and the Neolithic, we throw that in there. We throw these creatures in there to trap up the waters, to fudge up the waters, to make us not understand our own value as human beings and what we've done. And unfortunately, it has been done for so long, for so many centuries, that a lot of it we're so disinterested in. We're so disinterested in it as Black people. Let's specifically talk about Black people as we start this beginning of Black History Month. It is so important for us to know who we are and our history, but we prioritize it horribly. We don't see the value. And so when we are told lies, we can't filter the lie because we've never taken time to study. If you prioritize things in your life, I give you an example of what I told someone not too long ago. History is just like, say, learning how to drive. Okay. Can you live without learning how to drive? Yes. Is your life better once you learn how to drive and get a car and be able to get from point A to point B without having to wait on anybody, without having to listen to what somebody tells you or how to get to a certain place? You can do it on your own. It gives you the facility to grow, to feed your house, to buy things for your household, for you, to interact, to grow as a person. Now, having a car doesn't stop you from doing these things. But in a world that is more and more spread out, it does make it harder if you don't have it. Not having knowledge of your history and not prioritizing it puts you at a disadvantage. We have political candidates out right now who are fudging up the waters of history. And many of us can't differentiate what's true and not true. Oh, we can argue and say, oh, that sounds crazy, but we don't have the facts because we didn't put the time in, we didn't prioritize. Western civilization, Western history is not prioritized to talk about African history. It will go from talking about Paleolithic, Neolithic, and it will jump to maybe talking about Mesopotamian history. But if it talks about Mesopotamian history, it talks about Mesopotamian history as if these were white people living in the Levant. It provides no credit towards the Africans who were the ancestors of those people who moved into Mesopotamia. In the book that I'm writing, I know I keep pushing this book, but the book that I'm writing, what are some of the questions that I'm asking is to link those things, to let you understand that there is a link here. So we don't just jump from Paleolithic, Neolithic man all the way to, wait a minute, hold on. We do talk about the Bible. We'll talk about the Hebrews, right? We'll talk about that. But again, if you were reading the Bible with an uneducated mentality, you were probably going to, that's when I was a kid, not associate most of those people as looking black or dark like you. So when they say Hebrew or when they say Semitic, you just automatically assume, well, I got no part to play in this. And it makes history uninteresting to you. It makes history something that you feel as a chore. People tell me sometimes, I will watch you more and I would pay attention more to what people are talking about but history, but what's the point? It's boring, man. It's boring. What am I getting from it? And it's crazy to me because the very thing you're saying, right, that it is boring and what's the point of it? As I said at the beginning of this session, it affects you in every way. Mentally, spiritually, physiologically. It's something that you need to understand. When we talk about laws and Mesopotamian culture and Greek culture, and we talk about the Hebrews and things of that sort, and then we get into the Roman Republic and then the Roman Empire and things of that. You say it doesn't affect you. What's the point of it? But we're still talking about Socrates today. These people are still mentioned today as folks talk about the way we think. When we talk about war, people still are talking about, and the way we govern, still talking about Julius Caesar or the Caesars. When we talk about wealth, when we talk about cultural advancement, they mention Egypt, but then they tell you, as we see in the news and the media right now, they're not African. As ludicrous as that sounds. So when you do history sessions, and I'm gonna tell you something, I'm so encouraged because I see so many people. I saw it's a woman that I've been talking to off and on. She teaches Black history also, amongst other things, and I am just excited that there are people out here, right, who want to do that, who are doing that. And I was watching her program the other day, and just like with mine, she's not getting a lot of people initially, but she has thousands of followers. But when she does her lives, she doesn't get a lot of people. And I was encouraged by that because I understood that that's what we have to do regardless. We have to keep pushing to everybody out here the importance of it and hope that some will catch fire and run with it and share it and grow it. It's gotten to such a point that even before, when I first started doing our program, even before we were talking about people trying to stop the teaching of history, now it's gotten to such a point where you're seeing it. We all see it. And if history is being corrupted and revision like that nationally, you can only imagine what's being taught in your kids' schools. And so having her program and our program and different programs, Pastor Razor's, I just received his new book, right? Where he goes into Black history according to God's word, right? Where he talks about the linking of the Bible and the word of God with actual Black history. We need that. We need to see ourselves in the knowledge and the lineage of this world. We can spend so much time blowing it off. Carter G. Woodson understood it. That's why he started Negro History Week. And don't let it fool you. Don't let it be lost to you that he started it in 1926. And if you ask yourself, why did he do that? Look back to what was going on back then. Look to what was going on back then. He was in D.C. He was in D.C. in 1919. And if you know what 1919 is, 1919 was Red Summer. He was in D.C. and he talks about in his writing men being pulled out in the street, beaten to death, Black men, gunfights, people full of hatred because we had not shared our history. And the historians who were writing history during that time in the early 1900s, they were lying. They were coveting. They were telling people that there was nothing of value that came out of Africa. And so in the years to follow, in 1921, the Tulsa race riots and massacre, Rosewood in 1923, a people, not just a color, a culture that don't know who they are going to be lost. It's something that we need to know. I'm glad for you who are with us tonight. Dad, I saw you were here. Shanathan, I saw you. I see we got about 4 or 5 people in there. Hey, please let us know if it's your first time joining the Erudition broadcast, or just let us know who you are, that you're there. It does encourage us as we do these programs and as we talk about these things. So I really do appreciate knowing that you're here and that you're involved with us. As we go through this month, one of the things I really want to focus on, other than trying to get this book out, I'm really trying hard to get this book out within the next week. It will be digital, an interactive ebook initially. And then we're going to try to put out a hardcover book of it for those who just like to hold books in their hands. And I understand that fascination, that fixation of doing that. Hey, Tony, good to see you. Thank you for joining us. But one of the things that I really, really want us to focus on is contribution. You know, the hardest thing for me, and I have been studying history since I was a child. But one thing I have never done is that I have never sat down to write a book where we talk about Black history. And in doing that, you know, I've written, don't get me wrong, articles and different things on it. But in doing that, I became so aware of things that really angered me about what our culture, where we are, angered me about how much is left out, how much we're not given credit for, how much people have just purposefully denied to our people. And when I looked at that, right, I looked at how all of those contributions, right, were taken away. I looked at how they use different tactics to do it. If I tell you hominid or evolution theory, and I don't add genetics in it, which is what happened for the last 200 years, we've done that. And we pull bones up of monkeys or whatever, and I connect the dots and say, well, I found bones in Norway. So that means that there were human beings. You see how we play with history, but God will not be mocked. So then when genealogists started to look at it and say, no. We can trace those Y chromosomes from the man. We can trace those mitochondrial, the DNA of a female, and trace it down to that mitochondrial Eve. Right? we can look at these things and know that what you're saying in these bones don't make any sense. We can look at the DNA and we can trace and see that there weren't white people in areas that you claim them to be in history. And that this cultural inclusion, this diverse society that you're talking about, whenever we talk about the Egyptians, whenever we talk about the Carthaginians, whenever we talk about the Syrians, or whoever we talk, Sumerians, whoever we talk about, you always want to include yourself to make yourself seem like you were there when you were not. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the issue of Black history that we have to learn. We don't need to spend all of our time talking about ancient Greece and the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire and how the world changed in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance and the Reformation and the aristocrats and then the forming of the Americas, and on and on and on and on we go, where no one took the time to talk about the Elamites, the Shaba, the people of the Indus Valley, the Numidians, the Mannane people, the people of the Songhai Empire, early Ghana. Nobody talks about any of this. The Swahili Confederation. We don't talk about Zimbabwe. We don't talk about Timbuktu. We don't talk about any of that. But we spend a great amount of time stroking the ego and the fixation of pseudo-historians who, for a better part of 1,000 years, have taught us that our history has no place. And then when we have this month that America gives us, we have to beg people to see your history outside of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., see your history outside of Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington, Malcolm X. Great people, but look beyond. Look to who inspired them. Look to who they read about, who they learned about. Grow your knowledge. Grow your knowledge. Because what has happened to us is we've lost ourselves in what they taught us. We've lost ourselves in what they've taught us, in the evil of what they've taught us. We've lost ourselves. Sorry, I missed some of you guys' comments. Good to see you, Pastor Ray's. I was just talking about your book. Sean, how do we avoid it? How do we avoid it? I'm going to tell you how we avoid it. You get a book like Pastor Ray's book. You've been reading that Bible your whole life. But when you get a book like this, and you can sit there with that Bible, and you can now understand, hey, that's me they're talking about. I'm going to go share that with my nieces, my nephews, my friends. Hey, did you know that this was us? You know how else you grow it? You go and you start watching programs like this. You start interacting with people. You say, why do we avoid it? I'm going to tell you why. In a very simple story, my brother. And I've said this before, you may have heard me, but it bears repeating. It reminds me of Dick Gregory once said, you got to say it over and over again because everybody didn't hear it the first time. But here's the thing. I want you to think about, because, you know, a lot of us, we've been so removed from school, from that early K, kindergarten through, let's say, 8th grade, first part of school. And I want you to think about the first time you picked up a history book. I want you to think about the first time you picked up one of these history books. And they were talking to you about society. And as you start talking about society, they did exactly what? They showed you exactly what I said today. They showed you the Neolithic, Paleolithic man, right? They showed you the origin of man. And then they may have talked to you about cultures, Indian cultures and things like that. Like I talked about Mesopotamia, but they didn't reference the Mesopotamians as being African or Black or even being related to Blacks. They told you Mesopotamia and Babylonia because they wanted to, they separated it from Africa as the Middle East. But those things were all together in ancient times. People came out of Africa and went into the Levant in ancient times. But when you went through your history book, you didn't see you. Very rarely did you see somebody that looked dark-skinned like you, that you could say, hey, that's my people. Oh, they may have been a little bit tanned, but they definitely didn't look like what you consider to be Black. And then when was the first time you saw a Black person in your history book? They were subjugated. They were whipped. Somebody was pointing a finger at them. They were being led in chains. That's when you saw somebody that looked like you. How does that affect the psyche of Americans? How does that affect the psyche of you? And then as a teacher, Sean, Carter G. Woodson started Negro History Week with the idea of teaching our kids, our people, that we are more than a slave. That we are more than a slave. And it was fugitive. School districts all over the country refuse to allow you to teach Black history. Early Black history teachers and writers talk about how they would sit in classrooms with Dr. Woodson's early books and W.B. Du Bois's early books, and they would have them on their laps or under the desk. And it was fugitive pedagogy, right? It was fugitive teaching. When the white people came in, the principals and the people of power, when they walked in, they had to hide the book. And then they would pull it back out to teach the kids. That's not me making it up. This is what happened. And over time, with integration, we start having our books made down in Texas and Mississippi, in the South, for people who were fans of the lost cause. And then we went into the Archibald Dunning school of thought, where people basically revision history. They're still doing it. And it discourages you from wanting to know who you are. How much time was spent in school teaching us pre-Columbian history? I will tell you that they taught us about Columbus. They taught us about the Pilgrims. They taught us about the colonialization. They taught us about the Revolution. They taught us about all of these things that were American, but very little about you. The Irish know about the potato famine, not because they lived it, but because it's in their books. My high school world history teacher was a Kojic pastor. I could clearly remember him teaching me that the Sumerians had no known origin. He also talked about their worship of numerous false gods. Oh, was he so wrong? But he was only teaching what he was taught. The very Bible that he preached from said different, but he never removed himself from the white superior narrative. And there you go. When we figure out what this month really is about, this month should be dedicated to what I said earlier in the program. It should be dedicated to what Carter G. Woodson's purpose was. We want to look at the experiences, the accomplishments, the perspectives, the communities. We want to talk about what was provided for us, that was left for us. Our lost heritage, the things that was endowed to us, given to us. Because we got to do that. Pastor Razor, anytime. I will, anytime. We'll make time to do that this month. Because it's needed. It's needed. We talk about celebrating our culture, but we do some cringeworthy things in celebrating our culture. There's a divide here. Either we're going to talk about the slave or we're going to talk about the thug. And if we ain't talking about the slave or the thug, then we're talking about the Jezebel. Right? But nowhere in there are we looking at what we have been given. What we have been provided. You know, I'm going to give you a little bit of a preview here. I was looking at, there's a pharaoh, right? Hatshepsut. She was a female pharaoh, right? And she traded specifically with the Mesopotamian Empire. Historians, hating on the fact that this black female queen did this, they wanted to lie. They wanted to say it wasn't her. And they gave the credit to another pharaoh, male pharaoh, that came well after her. And this may seem like absolutely nothing to a lot of people. Again, these are things that seem like nothing. But the truth of the matter was, in denying her contribution, it was a deeper thing here. If you connect what she was doing with what was going on in the land of Saba, which is pronounced Sheba, if you look at how all of those things connected in the trade system, then you started to understand, wow, there were amazing black women in early history creating connections that changed the entire world. We're not taught about that. We're taught that, well, you know, the Egyptians and the Sumerians and the different people, they didn't like females. They were sexist and they hated them and blah, blah, blah. All of these different lies that we've been told. There's so much culture before 1619, people. There's so much culture. There's so much advancement. How we created metals, how we created the very weapons that were used by the Carthaginians and the Romans. They came out of African knowledge. Ships, trade systems that still to this day are used. But we're not taught that. We're taught about the Crusades. But how many of you know that the Crusades, the way to get from Europe, England, France, to get down, you had to go through those African caravan trails, ancient trails, and you had to be led through them by people who had been doing it for 1,000 or more years. Greeks wrote about it. Romans wrote about it. And yet we don't know it. It ain't in these books. It's not taught to our kids. Culturally, it's been lost on us. The ability to live and to travel through harsh lands, to know what to eat, when not to eat it. All of these amazing things that were brought over here. Baba Dick Gregory once said, they didn't go over there and choose nothing. You don't create an African American from nothing. They chose what they saw was worthy, looked good, strong, smart, solid, could endure. And then they bred them together. And I hate to use the comparison, but it's what they do to dogs to create a better, stronger, wiser. That's what they were trying to do. And so even before slavery, they knew who you were. They knew who our ancestors were. The Greek philosophers wrote about how you had to go to Africa. You had to go spend time in Africa to learn. The Israelites, if you look at that Bible, and I'm sure it's in Pastor Razor's book, over and over and over again, they were sheltered, protected in Africa. In order for the Roman Republic to become the Roman Empire, it had to conquer Africa. When you look at the Punic Wars, they had to conquer Africa. They had to have the Numidians turn on the Carthaginians. But do you know that? They had to destroy Hannibal Barca. They had to make sure that they could rule northern Africa. And then by ruling northern Africa, where much of the trade system was going, then they could rule Africa. But we're not taught that. And then when they decided, the church, when they decided, too many people got too much knowledge. They're saying things and doing things we want to be able to control. We went into the Dark Ages. They said, they burned down the Library of Alexandria. But there were many libraries in Africa. They burned down the one. And then during the Renaissance, what did they do? They started uncovering these things that they said was lost. Well, where are you uncovering them from? To the trade systems. To going down and getting things from Africa, from Ethiopia, from Somalia. There's a reason why they kept going into Africa, to uncover this knowledge. Post the Dark Ages, post the times in which they said everything was lost. You can call it the Dark Ages, call it the Middle Ages, call it whatever you want to call it. I'll call it a lie. Because we know, or we're starting to know, what knowledge was taken. What knowledge has been taken. You get into my message on this Sunday, especially when you said that they had to have Africa turn on Africans. They first created division, then conquered them. This is a central point. Yes, yes. They had to make them turn on each other. And a lot of the people who are in history that we don't even know about, we haven't even been taught about. If you would read it and you would say to yourselves, wow, that's how they did it. You know, the saying is Rome wasn't built in a day. No, it surely wasn't. It surely wasn't. It was built off the backs, off the work of Africans. And historians wrote about it. They talked about it. In this new book, I spent some time trying to teach about the Numidians, trying to teach about the Carthaginians, trying to teach about the Phoenicians, right? And Carthage, right? I do that on purpose because there is a connection here. There is a connection here. People didn't lie. They didn't lie back then because there was no purpose in lying. Polybius, the historian who went around and pulled up the ideas and thoughts and wrote everything that was going down in the Punic, First, Second Punic Wars, he talked about why Rome wanted Carthage. He talked about how Rome used other cultures and communities and nations to fight against their own. These wars went on for a while until they laid waste. I'm gonna give you one more preview. There's only preview more I'm gonna give you. There was a Numidian named Jugurtha. And Jugurtha, once the Numidians had traded on the Carthaginians to wipe out Carthage, Rome had promised them power, right? So that Rome decided that they would decide who the Numidian kings would be because they were now under Roman rule, right? Even though they had told the Numidians that they would have their own country and whatever, and there would be an equal stance. We know how that works. They were still under Roman control. When the next king came, Jugurtha, he was captured. He started a war, right? But he was betrayed by his own father-in-law for land. Yeah. So there is a lot of issues, and we see that play forward even into further history. One of my second books, the next one I'm writing, we're going to talk about the Portuguese, the Spanish, how they married into African tribes and made us all tell this lie. Most of us still tell it, right? That Africans were selling Africans into slavery. As if they really knew what they were doing. They were selling criminals and war people who they beat in the war. They were giving them over like they would do with anybody else in Africa. But what the Portuguese and the Spanish and the French and the British did is they used that to send people overseas. We got to understand this wasn't a time where they were living with Wi-Fi, where everybody knew immediately what was going on. By the time I take 500,000 people over to the Americas and you realize, wait a minute, what are they doing to us? What are they doing to people that look like us? We spend so much time talking about the Africans selling their people into slavery, not saying that they were not complicit. They were complicit, but we completely leave out the Essential do Negro. We completely leave out the contracts, the marriage contracts, the marital agreements that were made by the Portuguese, the Spanish, and so forth. That part is left out to create this functional narrative that Africans did it to themselves. It's been an hour. I love Black History Month. It is one of my favorite months of the year. It is also one of my busiest months. I am spending a lot of time trying to get this book out. My family was ill, if you didn't know. There was a lot of things going on, but we are getting there. And I'm excited. I really wish I could put both out at the same time, the print version and the ebook, but the ebook will be out first. It is interactive. You're going to be able to click it, ask a question, and you will get a response. One of the things that I did do with this book, and I'll say this before I get ready to get off here tonight, is I found, and this is something that for all of us to start to consider, I found that I was being too nice. That's the best way for me to put it. Too orthodox, too general. When I initially was writing my for each question, the responses for each question, I figured out the question, and then I started. Then I went back and I said, Eddie, you're being too nice. You're being too nice. You're not giving it the truthful explanation that it needs. You're giving it a general explanation. I'll give you an example. This is and I promise I'm gonna get off of here. So one of the questions was, I don't know if I kept this question, but one of the questions was, which ancient civilization was that? It was about it was about the Mesopotamians. And when I wrote it down, I wrote it very generically, right? I mean, I was very generic. And when I say generic, I mean, it's like I wasn't trying to really go into it, right? But I wanted to ask what had significant trade with Africa, right? And as I was writing it, I was like, man, I can't just leave it as a paragraph. It's a little deeper than that, right? And so I'm trying to pull it up because I wanted you all to really understand what I was saying, right? The question was, which ancient civilization in Mesopotamia had significant trade connections with Africa, right? And remember what it's asking, civilization, ancient civilization. So the answer was, it's Sumerians, right? The Sumerians, an ancient Mesopotamian civilization, had strong ties with Africa. They traded with East Africans and Egyptians, and may have even traveled around Africa. Archaeological evidence that we can pull up suggests that the maritime trade between Africa and Asia has been taking place for thousands of years. And I kind of just left it at that. Right, this is backed up. You can be traced back between the Arabian Peninsula, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley civilization, understanding what these are, blah, 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 right? Well, that was like the paragraph, and it was very general. And then I said to myself, no, man, you know what? No, what am I teaching people? Because that's what this is about. I didn't go into the Maluha or the Megan, right? I didn't talk about what was traded and why that's significant. I didn't go into why the Sumerian people and the people who were still in indigenous Africa, why they were trading with each other. And I had to go back and say, no, let me make sure I'm covering that. So that a historian can't go say, well, he's just talking general. and give him an argument. No, I want proof and evidence of why these cultures traded wood, spices, incense, what stones, and why was it important? What did they use? So when you read this book, that's why it took a little longer, because I had to go back. I had to do that for my own right frame of mind, to be honest to myself, and to make sure that I'm providing those who will buy the book with the right information, thought out information. We have to do better. Oh, good to see you, Dr. Easy Day. I appreciate you. Yeah, I try to get on and do this every Thursday. And a lot of times, as if you go back and you watch, as I said earlier, I'm starting to really understand the purpose beyond just what Eddie thinks, and appreciate what I really believe God is doing. Because we as a people have to learn who we are. We have to learn it. You have to learn it. Yeah. You may, as I said earlier, you may not think that it's that important. Can you survive without it? Yeah. But it's like that car, right? You don't need a car. But when you have one and you're able to get your groceries, get your family, and get back and forth easier and on your own accord, you appreciate that car. And so we need to look at history in that way. Can we survive behind it? Well, our culture has survived, but are we better? Are we utilizing our history? Are we growing from our history? This is Black History Month. This is what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be linking. This was left for us. This is our inheritance. And many of us are pushing away our inheritance. This was made for us. That slave that sat in that field crying from can't see to God was praying for you, praying for me, praying that their ancestors would have better, would know better. Not that we be out there twerking, not that we be out there doing all of this foolery that we're doing, but that we understood that through the grace of God, who we were, who we are. Those two things work together. All right. I've been on here long enough. I'm on about an hour and 8 minutes, almost an hour and 10 minutes over. I thank all of you. If you joined late, I appreciate you. I really do appreciate you joining us. Please do me a favor. Go out, share this with someone. If you got a question about Black history this month, please join in the Erudition Network group or on our page. Join us, talk to us, drop a question in there. We have 3 different shows that are on. Please drop your questions in there. We will respond. Maybe you got a book you're curious about. Maybe it's a subject in Black history that you want to really focus on this year. Drop it in there. I guarantee you we will answer you back, and we'll give you something, give you some kind of direction, or put you in a position where you can better understand what it is that you're trying to learn. And we'll be in there, and we can bring it up in these sessions online or in chats. All right, ladies and gentlemen, please be blessed. And if I don't do this, then I'm really bad at putting on this If you want to support the Erudition Network, we do have a Cash App that you can send to us. Anything, whatever you can send will be greatly appreciated. It goes into helping us to build programs and things that we're doing right now. A lot of the stuff that I'm doing with this book, you guys have greatly helped, and I with some of that too. I really appreciate you. So if you want to help us out, That's the ticker down here at the bottom. It wasn't up during all of the show, but there it is. All right, I got to get out of here. You all be blessed. Hopefully we will see you next week. I hear my wife coming in. That's what that ding ding is. You all be blessed, and we will, God bless, see you next week. Have a good one.